Hi, I'm here speaking with.
Hi, my name is Bradley. Local animal rights activist here in Plummer Park in West Hollywood, California at the LA March to End Speciesism 2018.
Oh, I'm here to speak to you today about speciesism and what does it mean to you?
Well, speciesism, you're probably familiar with the isms. You know, we know racism, we know sexism, classism. There's probably more I don't even know about. Is the discrimination against members specifically because they are of another species when it is not necessary, and it is, yeah, just like you would discriminate against another individual for these other isms. The same concept pretty much applies. We're just being inclusive to other species, which most human beings in the course of our history, we've been very centric around us, building our society, building our civilization. Now it's time to include the other species, because deep down inside we all know that other species feel pain, they suffer, they have joys, they have desires, and for us to stand in the way of that or even cause them undue pain and stress, it's not necessary. It's really not. And to believe it is conditioning. So you just got to condition out of that. So that's the long answer I've got for that.
Now, this is supposed to be the March to End Speciesism, right?
Yes. This is the March to End Speciesism, to bring awareness to this concept that most people don't even think about. And as more people become aware of this, how would I say, this obsolete belief system, it's not a belief system that's benefiting the earth. If you read anything about what the UN is putting out, about what animal agriculture is putting out in terms of our environmental degradation, in terms of our public health crises, it's not, even if you want to make it a human-centric thing, if it helps you, it's not benefiting us either. You shouldn't, though. You should have regard for other species, but a lot of humans live in I guess you would say, an insecure place. So the idea that they're going to lose something giving regard to someone else is pretty common. But we're here to challenge that belief and to act. Oh, someone's screaming at us. That's very common because people are afraid to challenge these belief systems. So we're not going to hurt her, believe it or not.
Now, are you a speciesist in any way that you can think of?
Well, I do have pets. They're all rescues. I treat them differently than I don't ask them long-winded conversations about existential topics the way I would a human, but I try my best, at least, not to take away from their quality of life. So, I mean, I am a practicing vegan. I don't knowingly buy any animal products. Just being in this society, though, we're surrounded by it all the time, so it's hard to say.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty strange to a lot of people. I even do alternative pest control and everything, so I'm pretty, to that level other people would consider crazy. But I just want people to become aware of these tortured slaves, basically, in industrial agriculture and even small farm agriculture. You know, there are beings that live fates none of us would ever want to be living through in our lives. Cages, having their families torn apart, their bodies mutilated. it's not where humanity needs to be. It's not humanity's efforts do not need to be going to these things. So I'm conscious of the term speciesism. I try not to participate in it, but I would say no to my own subjective mind, but anybody could challenge me on that at any given time. So long answer, short answer, no. Long answer, maybe unintentionally.
Okay. I, for example, am someone who is a speciesist in some ways. Some may say that's not speciesism. You have a reason for that differentiation, because essentially speciesism is prejudicial discrimination between species. It's something like when we do reason-based discrimination against sexes or against races, such as, oh, don't let that person stand in the sun for an hour, send the darker skinned person, they have better defense against the sun. It's, reason-based discrimination between two individuals. But usually when it becomes unfair, that's when we use the term racism, sexism, speciesism. And my concern is we're just going to, as it is, animal rights activists are just so angry at other people, these words, that person's a speciesist, is just going to be adding to that animosity we have towards others.
I think I have seen people kind of take liberties with the term. Like you said, it's the unfair. There's fair forms of discrimination, like, I have to treat the animals under my care differently than I would a human. But when we cause them pain, take away from their livelihood, their pursuit of happiness, and in which we reasonably can do, then that's when, right now, the most reasonably, okay, so we're getting really existential. I like to stay practical. Right now, the best thing you can do to begin ending speciesism, if you don't already practice this, is to not consume animals knowingly. That's the bottom line. I think that's the line that we're all gonna start with. We don't need to eat them. We don't need to eat their dismembered bodies. We don't need to eat their stolen secretions. We don't need to wear them. We don't need them in our cosmetics. It's really so pervasive. I've spoken to a lot of non-vegan. I'm the only vegan in my family. I've spoken to a lot of non-vegans. It's like it doesn't even register to them that that's there and that came from this source. So, we have to start registering that and discontinuing this practice. Just like if another species, I don't want to bring in hypotheticals, I want to keep practical for people, but if another species came down from another planet, there's billions of stars in this universe, and decided we could become commodities, and would we enjoy that? Obviously, no. So making commodities out of these other species just because we can, we have the technology, we have the strategies to do it, it's not justifiable on the base level.
I would agree that most of the factory farming of animals, most people would agree, is not something we should be doing. It doesn't sit well with them. So most people would find that it's something we should try to avoid. It's not the most reasonable, good way of going about it. We should try to change it. But, I would say most of us vegans agree on that. A few of us vegans, such as myself, am very bothered by us compassionate people jumping on bandwagons, including ending speciesism, because when it really comes down to it, I think if there was a human baby halfway around the world that was living in nature and then all of a sudden was facing starvation and or just being left to be eaten by a lion or something, I would want to try and save that human baby. But when it comes to, say, a deer that I now want to classify as, okay, this is part of the wildlife, I seem to want to let the baby deer, be eaten by the lion. Now, that is, some people would say it's speciesism, and I would say it is speciesism that I want to include all humans in society, but I think the reason I want to protect the human baby, is because I want the human baby to be protected by society, kind of like we want our dogs and cats to be protected by society. I want to extend that to all humans, and I can't justify it. It's a bias, it's probably conditioned in me, and I don't necessarily have a strong desire to get over it.
What is the question?
That some would call it speciesism, that I don't want to let that baby human be eaten by the lion, but I would let a baby deer be eaten by a lion. Because I want to include all humans in our society, and I want to protect members of our society.
Fair.
I mean, is it fair? Because that is speciesism. Why are we making a distinction?
We are responsible for what we can do. We are not responsible. I think I get, when I talk to non-vegans, like, we get into these when animals and ecosystems eat other animals. They don't have agriculture. They live different forms of lives. Obviously, there's so many belief systems we're getting into, I don't even know where to start. People start thinking that vegans value animal life over human life. It's just the reasonable value of life as far as you can go. And I kind of keep it, I mean, if there were conservationists, I might confront your situation. If there were conservationists that could come and maybe help that deer, I would not be opposed to that. I want to see ecosystems thrive. I know there's predation in ecosystems. I'm not naive to this fact. I speak to a lot of people who think, because I'm opposed to unnecessary animal death, I think that animal death never takes place, and we just go into all these little distracting things. To me, what can be reasonably done to help anything alive, and conscious animals are alive, they're conscious like us. Obviously, we understand ourselves better. We don't believe that humans should be apart from other humans. We don't think that they should be thrown to the wild, although there's humans in Yemen right now starving to death, and we're not intervening that hard. So there's a difference in humans between belief and practice. It's always going to be there. We like to believe certain things that we don't practice, but when we have the opportunity to put into practice, then, you know, we can at least alleviate some of that tension. So some would call that speciesism. I don't use such a literal, I don't know what the literal definition of speciesism is in the academic sense. To me, in the sense that I'm using it, it's to end unnecessary suffering, and picking a species to say that they deserve to suffer given that you had the alleviation possible. And that includes, I guess that does include human beings, but it's common for us to believe that humans, to believe at least, not always put into practice, to believe that humans that are suffering should not be suffering. Of course, again, it's not in practice. You can go to Skid Row and see, you know, we're in beautiful, wealthy West Hollywood. You can go to Skid Row and see impoverished human beings in incredible states of suffering. But it is not common for people to believe that specific animals, pigs, cows, turkeys, should be alleviated from suffering because of who they are. Pigs, cows, turkeys, chickens, etc. So to me, the biggest work right now is to get people to understand that the choosing of these species is arbitrary. Why do we give consideration to dogs and cats and not pigs? Pigs, cognitively, science is out. They're surpassing dogs. It's not a subjective belief system of, these weird countercultural people. The science is there. If you don't believe it's morally acceptable to imprison dogs and make them into food, you shouldn't do it to pigs. So there's a lot of belief systems. There's a lot of ways you can deconstruct it. I try to keep it simple. I like thinking in simple terms, but right now we can alleviate the suffering of these enslaved beings. And then if you want to, and you can do it with humans too. It's going to be a domino effect. You don't have to believe that just because you show compassion to animals, you have to stop showing compassion to humans. It's just you're widening your circle of compassion.
Well, to bring it back into focus, I heard you use the terms practical, reasonable, which are pretty much the terms the meat eaters use to justify their actions. And I think what's practical and reasonable for you is much more so than most vegans, just by what you mentioned earlier about use alternate methods of pest control. I can imagine you're someone who goes much further than most vegans. And I want you to understand it's a very slippery slope of what's practical, and maybe understand what's practical for meat eaters from their worldview is something that we want to push them more towards us. And my specific question with reference to the baby human is to recognize that most of us are conditioned to be speciesist, or maybe we actually think there's some logic to it. I'm kind of partly exploring it with you over here, because if there was a baby human about to be eaten by a lion, we don't know the baby, it's a baby that was living in a wild area, and we saw a baby deer, we would want to save the baby human, but we would probably let the baby deer be eaten by the lion. So based on the fact that it's a human, we would want to save the human baby, but maybe let the lion eat the baby deer. I'm trying to figure out if that's the case with you, and if so, why?
I would try to say both, really.
Okay. I would like you to rethink that, because most vegans I know don't want to keep the lion from eating the lion's food.
The lion, I live as me, I don't live as other beings. That lion can go find a baby. We have a hierarchy of life. We see certain aspects of life more. And I'm not sure if it is very common for lions to predate on infants, but in this scenario, the specific scenario, I would spare the baby deer, and that lion can go predate on maybe another prey animal. I don't foresee myself being in this very specific situation, so my compassion would see an infant, a mammalian infant, and want to save it. So maybe human and non-human. So maybe that's I'm a little different than others, but I don't believe that the lion not predating on that one particular deer, I don't think it would start, there'd be other mating species. So
well, it's definitely compassionate of you to want to save any animal from dying, but it is a struggle that many vegans have had, and they have almost come to terms with the cruelty in nature. And if you really dig into it, you'll find out that in nature, a lot of times it is the babies that get eaten by the predators. Sometimes it is an adult, but many times they go after the weaker ones, the ones who can't run away, and the parents try their best to keep the babies away from unsafe areas. But it's a hard sight in nature. Like, you watch any nature documentaries, you will see it a little bit that children are prey in many cases.
Oh, I'm aware of that, yeah.
So it is tough, and so now let's remove the baby factor, which seems to somehow increase your compassion for another being a lot more. Let's say it's an adult deer and an adult human who's a vegan. Let's throw that in. So a vegan who's not causing harm to others, and
Knowingly,
someone you don't
I'm aware
know.
that I'm aware that insects will unknowingly be stepped. We're getting into a lot of things. I don't believe being a vegan. I know life is at odds with other life, basically what you're getting at. I'm not naive to this fact. I didn't become a vegan because I thought there would stop being predation. I feel like vegan
It's
is like...
actually a different point I was making. The point
Oh,
is,
sorry.
and I don't know where you stand on this. Like, when it comes to babies, you wanted to save both. I'm trying to see if it's an adult vegan human about to be eaten by a lion. You don't know the vegan. And an adult deer about to be eaten by a lion. And you could save both of them. Would you save one? Would you not save the other?
I could save both of them, but not mutually exclusive to one another. That's what you're saying.
No, you can save both if you want to. You can save one if you want to, but the lion would be left hungry if you were to save either one.
Why? Okay, I need further information. Why am I in this ecosystem? Why am I looking at these things? It's hard for me to remove into like these abstract statements without knowing the deeper nature. I'd probably say both, and the lion can just wait until they can get another prey animal. I don't know. I would be living as myself. I would be using my own value system in that period of time. The lion uses it's more an amoral choice for the lion. I don't think the lion is making a moral choice. They don't know how to.
Okay.
So I could only live as myself at that moment and use my own values. And I would save the deer in that moment, knowing that it might become prey later. We can only live moment to moment.
Okay, that's fair enough. I mean, now I'm going to introduce something that's going to see whether or not you are theoretically a non-speciesist. That is, you're totally dedicated to seeing them as equals as far as possible. What if you could only save one? What would be the saved person, the vegan adult or the deer?
I know where you're going to put me, and you're going to put me in that hard situation.
I'm not putting in anything, I'm asking you to figure it out. The answer differs from person to person, and even if we decide one way, we may not necessarily act that way when we're facing the situation, but this is more trying to figure out if you're truly committed to not discriminating between species, or if we do, what's the criteria?
First of all, I don't know why that vegan human would be putting themselves in such a dangerous situation. I think that
a lot of vegans are going into nature to try to save a lot of animals. That happens often, and they do sometimes find themselves in danger. It's fine. Being undecided is also okay. It's something you have to think about. It's at least not clear-cut. For a lot of people, it's the most clear-cut. Yeah, I would probably save the human, but it's not so for you, and that's fine.
I would save I understand that the human being will go on into another scenario, maybe past this endeavor. I don't know why they're not using more measured foreseeing. The deer doesn't foresee what's happening to it. It doesn't have technology. It doesn't have it has organized knowledge, but not organized knowledge like we have about zoology and stuff and these things. If I don't save the human, I know how I will be perceived. I will be perceived as very immoral and selling out my own kind. I'd save the human, but I'd give them a long-ass lecture about why don't be foolish. And the deer, and the human live in different worlds. The human doesn't have to be there. They chose to. The deer does. If it was a person that I think would cause more harm to the world than the deer, I would choose the deer, though. I'm just gonna put that out there. If it was like the CEO of Nestle or something, and the deer like by CEO, I don't think human life doesn't have its own inherent value. Human beings cause some of the most systematic form of harm. Deer really don't. They just... There's differences between species, and there's ways of looking at things in terms of morality, but everybody values their life. Life is at odds with one another.
You know, all the stuff you're saying is still based on rationale, and it does seem like, you know, you're truly committed to being an anti-speciesist, to truly evaluate the situation independent of species, which is good, but I'm recognizing that I personally have a prejudice towards wanting to include humans in this protective net that I want to cast out on all humans, but I don't want to cast that protective net on all of nature, because I also value nature, but I'm okay protecting humans from natural threats. And so I'm aware that I have prejudice and I don't want to get rid of it, and I'm not sure why. You know, maybe I'll feel differently someday, but right now I seem very comfortable because it's been conditioned in me to, you know, be protective of humans, and, you know, that it's okay to not treat humans as completely part of nature, subject to the risks of nature. I want to protect them unnaturally. And do you think I should stop that?
No, humans should be protected. We have our own social structures. It's like... We have our own social structures. We should protect human beings. I mean, there's vulnerable human beings. We have our own psychologies, our own identities and titles and things. I just don't see when the two are necessarily at odds. Like, it's not going to protect more human beings to torture these other animals. In fact, impoverished humans, these factory farms are always next to impoverished human communities, so they get infectious. So I see what you're saying, and I agree with you. I look for the point where the two ideas are compatible. I just don't know when we're faced with all these situations where, like, here's a pig and here's human. Like, you know, it's important to evaluate how you believe, but for me personally, it's not my main focus. I'll just be honest. My main...
I agree. You know, I want your main focus to be on stopping this horrid factory farming, stopping just this inconsideration towards other species. I want you to think about that, but I also want you to struggle with, you know, why are you okay with some bias towards humans, and to recognize that the prejudices that I have, that I just shared with you, is there amongst most people, because they're also conditioned by the same society to be prejudiced towards their own species. And sometimes they'll use different kinds of reasonings to justify it, which, you know, you can definitely challenge them. Like, some people will say, oh, because we have sapiens, we are able to have wisdom. And then you take some examples of people who don't have wisdom, and you try and say, what about in those cases? When it really comes down to it, though, I do have prejudice, and I'm comfortable with it to some extent, because, you know, I don't feel I'm responsible to save all of the stuff in the world, and I'm okay making the choice of who to save based on my own prejudices.
That's fair. I don't feel personally responsible to save all life. That's impossible. That'd be a naive way of believing.
But let me
I feel personally responsible in confronting what I can. And I focus on animals because they're in very poor states. It's not necessary. I do speak out a lot too about human beings. I live next to Skid Row, our mental health epidemic. And a lot of people say they value humans more, and I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing all these impoverished human beings go. So that prejudice isn't all people. I just don't think they're applying it correctly because it's not coming out in the effect of the world. So I'm not opposed to the prejudice itself. It's not being applied. It's being very, very, very liberally applied and taken for granted, and people will make these blanket statements about the necessity of certain practices and how it's actually going to bring benefit to human life, and we have the evidence and the statistics to say no, it's not. So even if you have that prejudice, you can have that and it's still compatible with these other ideas. Other people may claim in their heart they don't. I can't govern other people. That's mental hell I refuse to live in. I can just govern myself.
And, based on these prejudices, sometimes it's in areas that I'm personally comfortable with, where I'm only figuring out where my actions are going to benefit some. But I'm also aware that other people use these same prejudices to almost do something harmful to another for personal gain. And I want us all to relate to the fact that we do have prejudices, and sometimes we don't even want to end those prejudices. So I don't want another word in a vocabulary to be the attacking vegan, you're a speciesist. I would almost like us all to recognize that we do have prejudices that are difficult to get over, even for us, most of us do. And to just try to reach out to people, focus on the issues that what's going on here is horrible. Now, I'm not saying it's not effective, the social pressure, the peer pressure, to not be a racist, not be a sexist, and therefore you don't want to be a speciesist. There is some way in which you can effect change, but there's also going to be a huge disconnect from most people who are comfortable with their prejudices.
That's fair. I don't think anybody stops being racist, because in their heart at least. There's a difference between how we portray ourselves on the outside and how we are feeling on the inside. We live in a social contract. We know, punishments. I'm gonna disagree with you. I think the term speciesist is fine to be in the lexicon. I think people should think just like racist. Most people probably have an inherent. Most people can probably see others part of their ethnic group, and sentiments come up, and maybe they do subconsciously, and they see a person outside their ethnic group, and maybe it's not even hatefully motivated, it's just they were raised seeing their own ethnic group, and it brings up all these feelings in them. So I don't use the term speciesist. To me, is not going to mean you don't understand a commonality with human beings. Just like it's just, to me, people realizing oh, these other species, they suffer for no reason. And we just say it's okay. And what is our baseline justification for that. Oh, because they're that species. So it's a term that like I agree we can't just be shouting at people and then like there has to be nuance in our delivery. Otherwise people will think we're crazy, we're just loony. I went through it with my whole family. My father grew up hunting, fishing, and then I came out a vegan. I'd been through it. I know how people think. I would never use the term speciesist with him. He would just be like, the hell is that? You know, so I know that we have to be considerate of our audience, and some are just not gonna accept the same phrasings of things. Some people won't think in the same terms, but I do think the word has power to at least get people to see that if you make another species suffer, and you do it solely because they are that species, that is not a justifiable act. So that's like if you want to take racism, like, oh, if you don't marry outside your race, you're racist. Like, no one is gonna believe that, like, that purity of, it's just this human mind has to, this is very hard to talk about. It's so nuanced. Human mind, it just has to have new language itself is subjective. In human beings, I understand what you're saying. I'm not really having the ability to articulate it. To me, the term, at least being introduced as a new term and getting people to think about these concepts, is relevant to me. Do I think we should just scream it at people with no context, or just say anybody that values a human life in really hypothetical situations is a speciesist? I think that's abuse of the term, similar to calling a person that has friends out in their own ethnic group but they don't really do anything really. There's always ways of taking our language and our belief systems to more literal or figurative senses. I use it in the softer sense of just you getting people to understand that, like, if you cause someone of another gender pain specifically because they are that gender, then, you know, we have a term for that. And if you cause another member of a species pain specifically, not through happenstance, I think there's always intention. Like, you wouldn't be, going back to the deer scenario, you wouldn't be trying to cause that deer pain. It'd be more like a passive, unfortunate circumstance. So I think I use it more in the active sense. If you do it with the intention, knowing you have the alternative, and you justify it specifically because they are that species, again, given the alternative, then people should start thinking like, oh, that doesn't seem justifiable. We have an alternative. We are just saying because they happen to be born that way, that's okay for that species.
I mean, just in terms of thinking and promoting thinking, you know, I'm fine with this, how I would personally be comfortable approaching it. We all have our prejudices, but some of our prejudices cause a lot of harm, and one of the most common things in society is to decide that just because a members of a certain species that we have decided to be more attached to, we're going to somehow care about their feelings that they share with others more so, like a dog more than a pig's.
Right.
So just in terms of introducing the topic and fully acknowledging that we all have our own prejudices, I wouldn't have a problem with it. But the thing with prejudice, it's unreasonable. It's like, for you, it's reasonable to consider the lives of insects. For most vegans, it's not. For many meat eaters, they think it's unreasonable to spend time thinking about pigs when there are humans suffering in the world. So the idea of what's reasonable...
There are humans suffering because the pigs are suffering, though. So, gotcha on that, but I know what you're saying.
But, in the sense, everyone has their own idea of what's unreasonable, what's practical, and what's not. But if we stick to the definition of what's possible, there's a lot that's possible, and most of us don't want to go there. So the point again is that if we use it as though you're practicing speciesism, it is the kind of same judgmental attitude, pressure-based approach that I'm hoping we can grow out of, since vegans are some of the most compassionate people. I'm hoping we can try to use language that is not judging as much. Don't get me wrong, I do want you to speak out for what is something you think is horrible, and you are hoping the other people also see it's horrible.
If I was faced with the CEO of Smithfields, I understand this mentality, like all humans are pure little beings. That no, if I was looking in the space of the CEO of Smithfield, I would have judgment for him, and I would not feel bad about that. There is a gradient of innocence. So not every human being is in this. I understand what you're saying. For the average person, the intent to do harm isn't there, it's just their conditioning. Yeah, I agree with you, but there are human beings also on the flip side. Let's meet in the middle ground. There are human beings that legitimately have to be confronted, because given them non-confrontation, given them, we're seeing it with the cases in Raymar Farms in Petaluma. If you don't know, Whole Foods sells their consumer base humane meat. And there's chickens cannibalizing themselves. So, and there's a pile called a graveyard of dead baby cows. That's where they get their dairy from. These people are not innocent human beings that just don't understand the suffering. They deserve to be confronted. So, love might save yourself. I need more nuance in the conversation before I'm willing to just say this is the right way. And maybe some vegans see it in more existential terms, some vegans see it in more literal terms, some vegans look for spiritual philosophy, some vegans focus on different legal cases. I don't think we're a homogenous group in thought at all. I think we all share the common denominator that we want to show compassion in various ways.
I completely agree. My concern is that we're being made to jump on the bandwagon and just adopt another thing. I won't get into it today, but even our whole concept of rights is flawed, which I won't get into today, but just as an example, I'll go to animal rights groups, meetings, events, but I don't believe in rights the way they do. But you still do it because that's where we are gathering, because we are people who see something that we don't want in society, that we are hoping most people wouldn't want in society. And I'm afraid this word speciesism is going to be used to make change in a way that could work. And for some people, change is all that matters, but I see it as part of the devolution of a communication-based society that tries to understand each other and tries to reason and discuss with each other. I'm not saying don't tell the CEO, or don't even go to a person who's shopping something, make them aware of the harm they're causing. but to do it in a way where you're judging the actions, but you're not coming across as close-minded to their reasonings, such as insisting that is speciesism, you are a speciesist. It should be more of, well, I think this is unfair. Do you think it's fair? Why do you think it's fair? Okay. Well, I don't find that convincing enough. But, leave it at that. You don't have to badger them and say, no, you are being a speciesist.
I've never really used the term in communication with non-vegans that way.
Do you know other vegans who do?
Oh, I know a lot of I didn't become vegan so I can be in the vegan club, I'm not vegan so I can be accepted by other vegans. I'm vegan to end this atrocity and for our earth and for everything. But I believe there should be nuance to the term. I agree with you on that. People that are there's some people that want to go so far as to say, I've heard them say, having rescue urban animals, you're enslaving them. I'm like, no, they would die on the street. Like, come on, be real. There's people that care about their internal righteousness. I do know that that is a poor human trait, and we see it turns off other people. There's a healthy middle ground, I think. I think that some members of society do need to be confronted, and we can't. So, slaves and human slaves, and communication was integral, but so was standing up. So it's nice of you to believe we can love on other humans to the degree that they're just okay. I don't see it as a practical reality. I'm gonna just tell you that to your face. I'm okay with the term speciesist. I don't think it should be screamed without context. We should also do the dialogue. That's where I stand on the issue. So.
And you do understand that in a society that jumps on the word hypocrisy, which I think is very badly used. They will jump on the fact that most vegans are also speciesists at some level. And
it's not practical to never have to living in the world as a human with our human things is different than animals living in their worlds with their things. So there is some aspect where, just making new developments into ecosystems, we're going to decide for those species that they don't belong there anymore because we belong there. So I know what you're saying in the very wide scope sense. Speciesism.
It'll really come across like I know that all vegans really believe that we shouldn't discriminate against species in the really atrocious manners they see.
To me, I think practicable and possible. I think people get, oh, you're vegan, well, maybe you bought some produce from a crop somewhere and something died for it. How can you justify that? There was no intention in that. When you buy meat and you know where it comes from, we have to call things what they are. There's a gradient of what is happening. I feel like people get complacent into just the futility of living. So because nothing can be perfect, nothing can get better. Well, I will not get into this now, but this is a very good counter argument I have as to why intent is another of those dangerous words, much like reasonable and practical. I would say just be aware of our principles, recognize that we will sometimes struggle with applying those principles in everyday life, and most of us are influenced by our herd. With vegans, we compare ourselves compared to other vegans, and we're comfortable doing the harm we do to insects. Meat eaters are comfortable doing the harm they do compared to their culture, and we should address it, get them to be more compassionate. But
I guess we'll stop this conversation for now. And I would say that I'm concerned that we vegans on the average are very aggressive, and this is just going to be another term used in an aggressive way, which is going to backfire as much as it helps. But I'll let you.
I agree that there's always tact that needs to be used. There's always strategy. I agree people's self-image of what they do isn't always in line with the reality. First things first, we show them the reality. A lot of times I talk to non-vegans, I try to make it not even like a judgment. I can't go into... First, this is what happens because of this. I don't even say you're causing this. This is what happens because of this. And then I wait to see... There's a lot of nuance we need to get into. This can go on and on forever.
Just a wrapping statement.
Okay, well, I'll make it about Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is coming up. It is a holiday based off a Holocaust. Modern day turkeys live in horrors beyond beliefs. They're actually not even reproductively viable at this certain point. The farmer takes the semen out of the male, inseminates the female. Their genetic line is literally so polluted they want to die. That is whether you want to be vegan, a welfarist, existentialist, whatever, I think we can all agree that that's a crime against nature, and you don't have to make that personal about you. You just have to accept it exists, and you have alternatives to not participate in it. That is, thank you.
Thanks, Bradley.